Innovation is an overused word in continuing medical education. But as a CME professional, I'm guessing you're often tasked with developing innovative education for busy clinicians who are struggling to stay current with the latest medical advances and who are looking for a quick and reliable way to get their clinical questions answered at the point of care without having to spend hours searching through journal articles or sifting through search results. I'm Alex Howson, and welcome to the Right Medicine podcast. And today we're talking about artificial intelligence and chatbots. You're probably intrigued by the buzz around AI and chatbots, but you're maybe not sure how these technologies could be applied in CME. And you want to create education that's both cutting edge and effective, but you don't know where to start. And incidentally, if you're a writer, we talk a lot about AI and exchange our expertise in Write CME Pro, a professional development membership for medical writers who are specialising in CME. Whether you're a writer, a planner, an educational designer, or a grant strategist, then this episode of the Right Medicine podcast is tailor-made for you. Join me and Alana Brody, Vice President of Strategic Educational Design, and David Setiadi, Chief Technology Officer, both at Projects in Knowledge powered by Kaplan, to explore how they're using AI and chatbot technologies to transform the CME experience. Alana and David will share their insights and expertise on how these powerful tools can help you create more engaging, personalised, and impactful education for your clinician audience. Join us. Let's start first of all with what chatbots are and how have they kind of entered the CME space and the work that you do at Projects in Knowledge.
So typically the way our chatbots work is that a clinician will be working with a patient, have a patient in their clinic, and they'll have a question about diagnosis, treatment, side effect management, and they want to have a quick way to check on their strategy. They'll come to the chatbot. They'll type in with natural language search. They'll type that into the chatbot, and then the chatbot will give them an answer that's pulled from the content within our Projects in Knowledge platform. So it's really a tool to direct learners to the content that they're looking for, really at the time that they're looking for it.
So it's a kind of point of care learning opportunity. How does it compare? How does that sort of resource compare with other point of care tools like I'm thinking of Hippocrates and UpToDate, those kinds of things?
Well, yeah. So I guess it compares because we're right in the workflow of a clinician. So thinking of it as clinical decision support and thinking of the chatbot as a way of engaging the learner, or in this case, the clinician. So they're taking both the role as a learner as well as a healthcare provider and allowing them to ask the questions right there at the point of care. And making it so they don't have to. The issue right now with healthcare practitioners is there's so much data and content to sort, sift through, and understand what makes sense for their patient. This is a way where they can just ask the question and get the pertinent piece of information. But not only that, but can have a dialogue with the chatbot. So it's not like a Google search where you type something in, or a Hippocrates search or UpToDate search where you just get a listing of search results and then you have to sift through those search results and then figure out what's happening next. This allows you to ask a follow-on question. In fact, our chatbot allows for auto suggestions. It looks like you're thinking about this, or maybe you want to refine because there's information about a particular therapy, and allows the learner now to really interact and get deeper engagement in less amount of time. And I think that's where it's a really practical tool for them to use.
I love that it's a practical tool. Given that we work in a field where, evidence-based content is at a premium, can you lift the hood for us and kind of take us on, into the kind of processes that you use to develop the content to make sure that engagement, that dialogue is evidence-based and is going to kind of send the learner, the clinician, in the right direction?
Sure, Alex, that's a really insightful question. And I love that question because it gives me an opportunity to brag a little bit about the PIK process. So all of the content that we develop, it comes from really two primary sources. So we have a Breaking Med news service where we actually have journalists on our team who cover all the recent evidence, clinical trial data, advances in care, and that information gets published on a regular basis. So we have that news service to pull from, that internal news service to pull from, and then all of our content is accredited content. Everything on the site is accredited for continuing education credits. And so what that means is it's fair balanced content. It's been peer reviewed. It's all evidence based. Any statement or any content that's related on to the site, it's referenced. So if it's not referenced, if it's an opinion of a faculty, then you know who that faculty is who's provided that content. So the chatbot delivers information directly from the site. It's a closed loop system.
Yeah, that sounds pretty amazing, actually, to me. And it sounds like you have a kind of continuous process of updating all that content.
Right. The news service allows us to update everything. So that's a real advantage of having journalists on our team.
And what kind of cycle is that? Is that like a 24-hour news cycle or?
Yeah, it's ongoing. It's ongoing. So every day there are updates to the site. And then any content that's been developed within the site also gets annotated and updated with those news reports. So that if an activity's been, if it's an enduring activity and it's been recorded and it's archived somewhere on the site, it'll be updated with those news reports.
And so presumably you're then also using the dialogue, the input, if you like, from the human interaction to collect sort of information about, the kinds of questions that clinicians have in real time, the kinds of challenges that they are. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're then using that data to, what are you using it for and how are you using it?
Sure. Well, that we love that data because it really helps to inform our needs assessments. So our needs assessments they come from a variety of sources, but the data from the chatbots, we actually get to see the verbatim information, the questions that the clinicians ask specifically in the chatbot. We can categorize those by types of questions. If it's a diagnosis-based question or adverse event-based question, we can categorize those questions. And then we also can kind of go peel the onion, as it were, and go down another layer, and we can see, was it a primary care physician? Was it a specialist of some type? Was it ancillary health professional, someone who maybe it's not a physician, but someone else within the multidisciplinary treatment team who's asking these questions? And we can look at the data, we can subsegment it in that way to really understand what our learners are looking for. And we get some very unique insights that way, both about what the target audience that we intend, the activities for what they're looking for, but also we get surprises sometimes and insights about clinicians who might be interested in our content that we wouldn't have anticipated originally. So, for example, we had one chatbot activity where the topic was multiple myeloma. And we took a look at the data, at the aggregated data from the chatbot, and we noticed that we had a lot of ENTs looking at that data. And we were puzzled, ENTs, why were they looking at a multiple myeloma chatbot? What kinds of questions did they have? And so we brought that so Kaplan has a lot of resources because Projects and Knowledge is part of the Kaplan North America group right now. We were acquired in 2021. And so we have a lot of clinical resources within the team. So we brought this data to some of our clinical thought leaders within the Kaplan group. And we said, what do you think? What do you think about why ENTs are looking at this data? And some of our clinical folks said, oh yeah, like it was a no-brainer. Oh yeah, ENTs are usually the ones to catch myeloma first, more often than not. The disease tends to progress slowly and it takes the form of sore throats, nosebleeds, vocal cord disruptions, swelling of the thyroids and nasal structures. So it made perfect sense to them. Yeah. But it was an interesting surprise to us. So we get insights like that, all the time.
So when you're looking at a chatbot for a particular activity, can you give us a sense of, you're pulling that aggregate data. How many users do you anticipate for, an activity and users of the chatbot itself?
Right. So if we have an educational activity that, say, has for the overall activity, maybe 2,000 learners, just as a number, a general number. I don't know, David, what would you say? Maybe 10 to 20% of those learners would engage with the chatbot and ask questions. And then one of the unique things is we can actually see, to the point David made earlier, we can actually see the learner flow. So they ask one question, then we can see if they ask a second question, either a follow-up question, or we can actually see if the follow-up question is on a new topic.
Yeah. And I think the neat part is, just to add on to what Alana's mentioning here, is that we can see their behavior, but we can also see the gaps based on the questions that they're asking. So obviously when they're asking questions, they're knowledge gaps that the learner's having. So, and how can we break that out by a cohort? So a cohort of primary care physicians versus specialists, ENT specialists or oncology specialists. What are the different gaps that they're having as they're asking the questions? And furthermore, we can take a look at our actual content and take a look at the gaps. Well, are there responses for this? What is the latest in those areas? And how can we meet that need more effectively? So we're getting all that information, not to mention, as mentioned before, all the content that gets responded to is all CME content, which means a couple things. One is that it's a vetted source of information. So it's been peer reviewed. It's evidence based. But two, just by asking the question, our learners can also get credit, CME credit, for asking the question and giving some sort of evaluation of those responses. And those help two ways. One, it helps our learners get credit for the time that they spent. So it's a win-win for them. They're learning something new and they can use it with their patients and they're getting credit. And for us, we can use that information to continue to improve the AI engine of matching results to the queries and doing that content matching. So altogether, it's sort of an ecosystem that's been developing here. And we've been developing at Project Knowledge for 10 plus years. So every year or every month or every question, it gets smarter and smarter to develop those content matches.
So I have questions there then about that sort of ecosystem. One is how you pull your learners into that ecosystem. And the other is, I guess I have three questions. So I'll state all the questions and then we can kind of break them down. The first is, how do you pull learners into the ecosystem? The second is, once you have all that data, you're sharing a lot of information about the kind of data that you have. How do you visualize that? And how are you analyzing that dialogue, that qualitative data? And then the third question is around privacy. How do you handle that privacy part of learner engagement? Because, obviously in the artificial intelligence world, one of the things that we're increasingly becoming concerned about is privacy. So 3 questions. Go for it.
I could start from the back forward. Probably it's just to get it out of the way. So from a data privacy standpoint, everything is aggregated and de-identified. So we're not sharing any personal or physician level data with anyone. If we use any of that data, it's de-identified and used internally to improve the engine. So that's where that sits. So, be rest assured that data is really to improve the engine. And if anything, it's to provide insights on a greater scale or greater scope of what's happening in the field of medicine, specifically those disease states. So that's how the data privacy piece works. Mm. In terms of engaging our learners, there's many different ways. We find organically it already happens. It happens because there's not enough time, like I mentioned before, to sift through all the content that exists in the disease area. There wouldn't be enough time. There could be enough time, but think of it as listening to a podcast or to a webcast. There's an investment of time there, which sometimes they do have the time, but other times it's like, well, let me see if this information exists. That's usually where it starts. And usually as a researcher or someone that's looking for information for their patients, that's where it starts. So they're organically already going to look for it. And that engagement actually becomes the beginning of multiple engagements, because that will lead the door to them listening to the podcast or the webcast as they need to get more information. So we find that organically already happens. But secondly, there are other ways to drive engagement if there was, how do I put it? There's ways to drive engagement because we find there will be value to those learners. So for example, we could share the top 5 questions. So here are the top 5 questions that their peers may be asking. So that's valuable information already, because now they're like, oh, those are things that my peers are asking. And it also sparks the curiosity. Wait a second, what are the answers to that? And then furthermore says, oh, I can ask similar questions, or I have other questions that need answering that I can use this chatbot for. So again, it's a little bit of a pass on effect. Once they've started, they can continue to use it more and more.
And that dialogue piece is kind of critical as well, because go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And that dialogue piece is critical because what we're finding now this now goes more into chatbot technology. What we're finding is that as people ask questions, 2 things can unfold. Either they get very specific questions that they need very specific answers to. And sometimes the chatbot can come back and say, I don't have that particular answer, but I have something close to it. And here it is. Or they ask very general questions. And the chatbot needs more information to find the answer for them. You know, there are multiple areas where you have comorbidities, and you might have a question about a certain comorbidity, but you have to give the chatbot more information about that comorbidity so it can actually find the response that you're looking for. Again, these are all good examples of how that engagement starts. It starts with the piece, and then the chatbot takes over and starts giving you prompts and suggestions and match options to make your life a lot easier to find what you're looking for.
And how do learners find you? How do clinicians find you? How do they find the chatbot?
Well, we have a huge membership list of people who have been engaged with the Projects of Knowledge website. The site's been up, I don't know, for a couple of decades, right? Like since the beginning of the internet or something. And
that's a long time, Alana.
Yeah, it's since the beginning of the world. No. So,
yeah.
So we have over 500,000 clinicians who we consider members of the Projects of Knowledge platform. So we speak to them on an ongoing basis. We have regular email communications. We also have both clinician and also patient-focused apps where we can message out through the app to engage our learners or to engage patients to bring them into the conversation. We can share information based on what they've already participated in. So if we know a learner is interested in, use my multiple myeloma example, then we can, and we have new content or a new chatbot or updates to a chatbot, we can communicate that out to learners who have already expressed interest and then bring them back in. And then we follow all of that. So we can see patterns. We can see the times of day that we communicate best with our learners. It's interesting with the chatbot. We can actually see the time of day that clinicians come into the tool and use it, right? So mid-afternoon tends to be a super popular time. So they've had their morning clinic, and then they have questions about they have a specific patient case in mind. They'll go to the chatbot, try to find answers for a case that they're thinking about. And then we can see later on, they'll come back, go deeper into that content that they were looking at, and maybe complete the full source activity and get CME credit for it.
So interesting. So you're really kind of building that cycle of trust as well with having people kind of come to the app and you being able to kind of message out from the app as well.
Exactly. And what David said before, clinicians are super busy and medicine changes and moves fast, especially in my area in oncology. Every day there are changes and advances, and it's impossible to keep up with it. So clinicians, they want to have a trusted source that they can come to find the information that they're looking at, but they may not have in that moment time to sit down and consume an entire CME activity. But at least this way they get the information that they need in a certain circumstance if they're treating a specific patient, for example, and, come right to that content.
And I would just add on one piece to that. I mean, the legacy of Projects of Knowledge has been to bring technology. So not only the content, but technology and to the forefront for clinicians. So a lot of jokes since the beginning of the internet. Projects of Knowledge has been around since 1980, bringing things like internet and teaching how to surf the web was one of them. Basically teaching HCPs on how to use technology to enable better healthcare outcomes. So that's been the legacy of it. And this is sort of just the next phase. We can see chatbots as the next technology that can be very helpful and useful for HCPs at the point of care.
So I definitely want to dig into that. We talked about privacy. We talked about how you pull people into your ecosystem. What about that qualitative piece? How do you kind of handle what must be volumes of qualitative data that is challenging without Cactus software? Can you give us a sense of how you approach analysis of all those qualitative comments?
Yeah. So the neat thing is the proof is in the pudding for us, and we can use our own technology to help us. So volume of content, how do you deal with volume of data? How do you deal with it? Well, we also have tools that we've built based around aggregation and AI to help us pull the really pertinent, what I call signal out of the noise. It's like, what is the signal out of all this data that we have? What's important to us? And it breaks down into a few different things. And it starts with understanding who's using the system. So, and what are the profile of those people using the system? So that lets us know, like I said before, it's a primary care practitioner versus a specialist. And when they're using it, so easily trying to look at, what's the timing like? What kind of questions did they ask? What did they involve? So the beauty of what we're using here and the AI technology that we've developed here is around natural language processing. We can break down the question in terms of what's called intents and entities. Think of the intent of what is the meaning behind what they're looking for, and entities is what are the exact pieces or pertinent specific pieces of information that they're looking for within that intent. So it could be the intent is to understand what the latest treatments are. Okay, so we're going to look for treatments, and they're looking for patients that have so-and-so between the ages of so-and-so. They're looking for treatment information around this particular area, or they're looking for side effects that affect those people. So we can using natural language, we can break down the intents and entities and break them out so we're taking the qualitative, turning it into a quantitative chart, which allows us to find that signal and say, that's very interesting, because almost everything falls into this pattern. And we can talk about 80% of the people ask questions like this or are interested in that. But wow, there's this outlier segment of 5 or 10% that are looking for something different. What is that all about? Again, see what the insight may be around that. And it might be around ENTs, as Alana mentioned before, it might be around other different pieces. And we can start to now find narratives and context within that wide arrangement of data, and then really look for pieces that would support that. It might be anecdotal questions. Here's a question that lines up directly with that insight that we found as an outlier within that charter graph while looking at the whole data set.
So you're looking at doing a lot of cross comparison with different types of data within your kind of wider data set as well. That's really interesting. Where's all of this going in the future? How do you see this, chatbots and other, I guess, generative AI technologies shaping, the field of CME and CPD?
Alex, you're asking like the hard questions.
It's the questions we all want to know, right?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So first of all, I'm glad you mentioned generative. I was interested to see where it would come up in this. So just note, everything we're talking about here is not generative AI. So we're talking about, I call it like traditional AI, where the algorithm or the machine is helping find patterns based on very structured input and based on content that is what Lana mentioned is closed loop. This is content that's been vetted, that's CME certified content. So accredited content by us. So we're not adding a layer of making up any responses. There's no generative piece that's happening here. But what we are adding is we're adding a level of machine learning. And the machine learning is where we train the algorithm to get better at detecting what it's looking for. So it might be treatment information, it might be diagnosis information, so on and so forth. Think of it like, how AI is being used to help do screenings for information. So that's very much that side of it. Now, generative falls into the next level. And when I say next level, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the evolution. It just means that it's a different kind of technology where now we're asking the machine to create responses. And we have to be careful there because those responses aren't vetted and it's not sure where the content was created from. What was the seed content built from? So I'm just calling out the differentiation because I think that's important to know where the steps forward are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think generative will continue. I think it's not ready because there has to be standards put in place, compliance pieces, understanding of where the content validation is coming from, and whether that is actually useful and can be used in the practice of healthcare and medicine for, to improve outcomes. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that will continue to evolve. Now, on the other side, when you start talking about machine learning and looking at the content and doing predictions, I think that's where the next level will come. As the algorithm gets better at understanding what our docs are looking for, as we use this as a tool to augment our ability to see or predict what may happen with our patients, that might be where we can start personalizing. And we'll just talk about personalized medicine, doing shared decision making while looking at data, and really allowing the technology to bring forward treatment options and having discussions about those options and seeing sort of that wide array while allowing the HCP to make those decisions. I think that's where the next step is going, because there's still a lot of savings, time, efficiency, and really allowing docs to see the whole picture, to help them see the whole picture. I think that's where the technology will continue to flourish.
So I'm really glad you made that distinction, and thanks for clarifying that. And as I'm understanding it, the distinction is between predictive and generative. Correct? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that one way of thinking about it?
That's definitely the line in the sand. And when we say generative, I think what also should be known is generative also means that when you're creating something, it's the AI that's creating. So it becomes there's terms out there, you can call it synthetic. It becomes a synthetic duplicate or synthetic piece of content that hasn't been tested against real data or with experts that have vetted what actually has been created.
No, that's really helpful. So I guess to kind of wrap up, you're talking about personalized medicine. You're talking about moving toward a more predictive approach to using this technology. Are you seeing that anywhere else? I'm thinking of oncology in particular. I'm sure there must be similar types of tools around. I don't know. So,
yeah.
Well, where do you see personalized medicine? Yeah, go ahead.
Right. There are tools being developed by many different organizations to take AI in a different direction, using technology to look at medical scans and to be able to predict over time based on, hundreds and thousands of medical scans, the likelihood that a patient might have a tumor of some type. That's not what we're talking about in continuing medical education. That's a completely different application, but it's the AI is being used in a lot of different frameworks. And one of the things that we are constantly looking at is the quality of the information that we develop, that it can be vetted. And that's one of the big issues with the moving into the generative space, is that, we don't want to just be making things up that aren't, reliable and verifiable and reproducible. That's the other thing too, is every time you ask the question, you should get the same answer. Mm-hmm. The other issue that we're looking at is issue related to copyright. Mm-hmm. When information comes up right out of the chatbot, we have to make sure that it's copyright protected, that we're respecting publishers' rights. So these are all things that, we're looking at in our organization.
And I guess to wrap up, I think we've covered quite a lot of terrain. Are there things that I haven't asked you about that are important in the work that you're doing with chatbots, or in terms of how you see them evolving in CME in the future?
Well, Alex, I think the real way for you to know is to invite us back in a year or so.
We can do that.
Then we can give you an update on all the great stuff that David's working on and has been working on, because it's always interesting to see how he and his team have evolved. They always follow the trends and continue to evolve. So, that would be fun.
I would just add one piece to that. So I mentioned personalized medicine, but really, just to make it apply to CME, it's personalized learning. And the learning is all about understanding the gaps. And we already alluded to it at the beginning. So if you already know there's a gap in knowledge that you're having. And you can predict what are the other gaps are, or you can predict what the areas that you might need to improve on. I mean, you could use the AI to really help you get better and close those gaps, right? Like that's the idea. Like it's a system that can bring you specific learning interventions that will help, improve quality improvement, let's say for a hospital, for certain areas where they know their clinicians need to learn a new skill or have gaps in certain skills, or for research gaps in certain understandings of certain pieces of content, or being kept up to date on the latest guidelines or latest FDA approvals. Like all those things are important to know who needs that information and how can you deliver it, right? And you can use an AI system to help deliver that already and close those gaps right away.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually raised personalized learning because, as you mentioned earlier, the specificity of the gaps, not only in knowledge, but in practice, because you're getting that information in real time from the types of questions that your learners are asking. You can see how that kind of feeds into a much more personalized learning pathway, potentially over time.
And sort of the golden piece to all this, as Alana says, invite us back next year, what we're striving towards is tying that back to patient outcomes. So if you can see how there's been a change in knowledge or a change in behavior or performance by the clinician, you should be able to also tie that back to a change in their patient's outcome and complete that whole cycle.
Are you heading in that direction?
Yes.
Most definitely.
So a return visit should be on the cards for sure in order to get an update on how that's working. David Setiade and Alana Brody, tech and personalized learning wizards. We'll just leave it at that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with listeners of Right Medicine. I've learned a lot in this kind of short 30 minutes or so, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to
Thanks, Alex.
talk about what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I wonder what your takeaways are. Here are mine. First of all, it's possible to use AI-powered chatbots in your CME activities to provide clinicians with a quick and reliable way to get their clinical questions answered at the point of care. And over time, you can build and maintain a cycle of trust with your clinician members, ensuring they can rely on the technology for efficient and effective patient care. Second, you can use data from chatbot interactions to gain valuable insights into your learners' knowledge gaps, their educational needs, and trending topics in clinical practice. And third, while all of this is possible, you need to really pay attention to copyright compliance and privacy. You'll need to verify that the information provided through chatbots is copyright compliant to safeguard the rights of original publishers, and establish protocols to ensure that all learner data is de-identified to ensure their privacy. That's it for today's episode. Join us on May 13th for Monday Mentor, and again on May the 15th for an episode with Poonam Kapadia and Annette Schwind on women in CME and CPD. In the meantime, subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss an episode. The best way to do this is to sign up for my newsletter, Right Medicine Insider, where you'll get updates on not only podcasts, but also CME. See you next time.